All right, outdoor season is over for most of us, and we're shifting our focus to indoors. I'm about to build a new set of arrows, so let's talk about arrow nodes, how to find them, what they are, why they're important, and what you need to do with that information. So I'm going to try and actually keep this one short and sweet and concise and to the point. So the first step is to find the front arrow node. Basically, you pinch the arrow nice and light. You don't want to squeeze it too much because you can affect the dynamics of the arrow. So nice and light on one spot between your finger and thumb, give it a whack. And then let it fall, just pinching it gently. And what you're looking for is to feel the vibration in your fingers. If you slide that pinch point closer to the point and give it another whack, you might notice that it vibrates much, much less. You can do the same if you go a little further up the shaft and you give it a whack. It almost doesn't vibrate at all. So what you're looking for is the spot that you can find that you can give it a whack, and it's going to shake and vibrate for 3 to 5 seconds at least. That's kind of the spot that you want, wherever you feel the vibration lasting the longest. I cheated a little bit, and I've already done it on this arrow. I've got the mark there, so I knew exactly where to do it. But when you're building an arrow, it's a good idea to check that and then see where it lands and just Sharpie it right on the arrow. The next thing to do is to know why this information is important. So we'll look at that next. Okay, I'm not much of a graphics artist, not even a very good artist, but I do have the ability to steal a whiteboard from my children, so this is what we're going to start with. So if we're looking down on a shooter, we're going to call this a right-handed shooter. And then this right here is the plunger button, obviously, shown by that guy. And then let's assume this is a bow that's being drawn. If this red dot here is the string, this is out, fully drawn, at full draw, being hooked by your fingers. So what happens to an arrow when you are releasing it? For finger release shooters, this arrow, let's look at the nock path, essentially, from this point. So it's going to start from here. It has to, as you open your fingers, all finger shooters will have the initial movement of the nock come out away from their hand. So the path of the nock will travel like this. It's going to come away from your fingers, and this is the initial movement of the nock. It's going to swing back over this way, cross this center line, and then swing out in this direction, and then get to this point. This is a very important point right here, and this is roughly your brace height. So this is the path of the nock when you release an arrow. So let's put an arrow in there now. So at full draw, your arrow, switching markers, your arrow is along this black line, okay, and before you've released. As soon as you start to release that, the arrow will bend at 2 points. So its initial bend, when it starts to get force in here, is going to start out here. So that'll be the nock, say right on this spot. And then the point of the arrow is going to bend in that same direction. So it's going to be out here. And then if you drew a line on the arrow, the first movement of the arrow is going to be something like this. Now the nodes are the 2 points that cross this center line, and they do not move. What happens is on that initial release, your arrow will bend towards your riser, and the nodes will stay on this center line. Now, let's follow the nock a little further. So the nock comes along the purple path and will pass the center line again. And then at the same time, that arrow is flexing back the other way. So at this point, and then roughly here, because it's all moving forward, that arrow is dead straight again. And then the next movement is out to the right. So if your nock comes out this way, and your point will flex back this way, if we drew the arrow, it flexes away from the riser. So In these two motions, your node is always staying on the center line here. So what does that mean? So the location of your node at the front starts, or should start, just behind the plunger. And what it allows it to do is the first movement of the front of the arrow ahead of the plunger is always away from the plunger. So this allows the node to move up towards the plunger without influencing anything here. What the next movement does is flexes the arrow away from your riser so that that's how you actually get clearance. If your node is too far forward to start with, this first flex will interfere with the plunger and cause issues. This arrow can push itself off the center line, and then you'll have contact in places, and it makes it very difficult to maintain control without a perfect release. So having the node behind the plunger gives you that leeway space to create the clearance as the arrow passes your plunger button. Okay, since we're talking about the front node specifically, let's zoom in on the riser a little bit and see how that affects it. So let's assume this dotted center line here is the line of the arrow to start with when you're at full draw, and then you release it, and then all the flexing starts to happen. So the first movement, say the node is behind the plunger like it should be, that arrow initially flexes this way. So it's coming from here, and that's where your arrow point is. Now, if this was on the plunger, it's going to flex that way. And then you can see how as this starts moving forward, before it can flex all the way back to the other side, this arrow will start to press the plunger in. What happens is this flex largely depends on your release. A smooth, easy, clean release, this may not flex as much. A really, choppy or poor release, maybe you put a little bit extra bounce in the string and you make this flex much, much more. So this is just really the consistency of your release. And if this release is not consistent, you can see how much, if this were to bend, how much it interacts with the plunger, and that can cause some major inconsistencies. What we really want is this node to be far enough back that it can do this first bend no matter what. And as it's moving forward, well, by the time it reaches this point, the arrow has already started to come back and is not interacting with the plunger as much in this first phase. Then, as the node gets further up, the arrow is already flexing the other way and will clear the plunger, and the plunger doesn't have to do as much. All we need the plunger to do is absorb this bend a tiny little bit as it's moving, as the node moves towards it. So here's a neat little setup I came up with just to kind of show the difference across a few different arrows that I've used over the last couple of years, how they've set up and where the nodes end up being. So basically what I've got here are a few different arrows. I've kind of set them all on this square, so they're all kind of at the same starting point. So you'll see the relative lengths in a minute. But I've got at the top here, we've got a 450 VAP. And then we've got a 380 VTAC. We've got a 420 spine RX7. We've got a 500 spine VAP, and then a 500 spine ACC from Easton. This one here is my measuring stick. So it's just an old cheapo arrow that I've basically put a piece of tape on, put a scale on it. So then I essentially use this little cardboard collar here to bump into my plunger when I'm doing draw checks. So if I'm checking my draw weight, it's almost like a clicker that pulls the arrow off of my string, so I know exactly the right draw length when I'm checking my draw weight. And then so what you see here is that these arrows all are different lengths. The 450 VAP here and the 380 VTAC, I've basically just got them at full length. This VTAC is what I shot at Lancaster last year, and it did really well for me. But you'll notice if you watch those, if you watch the shoot downs back, it was a bit inconsistent at times. I managed to do okay with it. I like the arrow weight. I like the way the bear shaft's tuned in, and if I did everything perfect, it shot very, very well. But there were moments where I didn't do something perfect, and it really, really showed. So what you see in the RX7 here is basically, if I'm comparing all of these, like I said, this collar is essentially right at the location of my plunger. So if I drew a line up here, that's exactly where the plunger would sit on all of those arrows. So you can see with the top two, the plunger would be sitting behind the node. So this node is ahead of the plunger. And then with the rest of them, the node is well behind the plunger. So this is more what we need for a forgiving setup. And actually these RX-7s are basically what I've shot my personal best with on indoor scores anyway. But basically what ends up happening with these is in a low lit range, they're fantastic. I absolutely love them. Pound the middle all day long. In a well lit range, basically it's so shiny that I just lose it in my vision. I almost can't see the arrow, and I have difficulty aiming. So that's why I switched to the VTAC before Lancaster, but because I could at least see it and aim with it much better. But what you'll see is the gold marks here are the nodes for each one of these arrows. So with the node being well behind the plunger in this case, and the node being well ahead of the plunger in the long ones, it's clear to see that the shorter arrows are much more forgiving. What the other marks mean, so on the RX-7, I've marked these black Sharpie points are the nice thing about this blue anodizing is that it wipes off from the biter plunger. So I can see the wear marks. So that's where my wear mark starts, and that's where it ends. So my node is in between the wear marks, which is great. It is pretty far forward. So what I would actually want to do here is go with a slightly stiffer shaft here and bring that node back, or lower point weight. It's 100 grains in there already, and so I'd have to look for something lower. But the lower point weight or stiffer arrow would slide that back just a touch. Unfortunately, with the RX-7s, the 420 is the stiffest 23 that they make, so I'm kind of out of luck there at the moment. But I've got some X23s coming that I'm going to try and set up this year, so we'll see how those go. And then with the VAP 500 here and the ACC, they set up and they shot very similarly. The difference here, why this one's more forward, is the VAP has a 140 point in it, 140 grains, and the ACC has a 100 grain point. So it just worked out nicely that those are the only points I could find for these ACCs because they're discontinued. But essentially, this Sharpie mark here and this Sharpie mark here are that's where the wear marks start and stop. So it's really hard to see on the camera, so I just put extra Sharpie marks here. But on the ACC, that node is dead center almost in between my wear marks, which made for a very forgiving arrow. And this is the one that I shot for the World Games. It's the one I won nationals with this year for field. It was a very forgiving arrow setup. The VAP was very close behind. I just liked the arrow weight a little bit more. It spread my crawls out a little bit better on my tab. So that's why I went and shoot. There's a couple other reasons that I shot the ACC. So yeah, that's basically, in a nutshell, this is how the nodes would lay out with different lengths, different spines. This is where I've ended up with some experimentation. I shot the full lengths for field 2 years ago, the 450s. And what's interesting is this arrow, the 450 VAP at full length, and the 500 VAP at 29 inches, I think I've got it down to. They tune, bare shaft tune, almost identical. They both, if you're shooting really well and you can get a good bare shaft tune, these two arrows will actually put the bare shafts and the fletches on top of each other. Similar draw weight, everything. They tune almost the same. The drastic difference is the forgiveness between the two. So having the node well behind the plunger or having the node in front of the plunger makes a big difference in forgiveness. There. So in a nutshell, what you need to do with the node is keep it slightly behind your plunger. So there's no way to be able to tell you how much. This is something you're gonna have to do a little bit with trial and error. If the node is in front of the plunger, then the first movement is away and it's going to press in the plunger as the shaft passes. And then that flex in the arrow is really dependent on the type of release you have. If you do it the same every time, this doesn't matter. If you're very, very consistent with the release, and that's how some people can get away with a node closer to the plunger. If you have the exact same thing, it has the exact same reaction every time, you can get away with it. You can shoot really well. If you have something in your release that just causes it to flex a little bit more or a little bit less, then that initial movement is going to be inconsistent on the plunger, and the plunger won't be able to react the same way that it always does, and then you'll have arrows kind of spraying. It's really, there's not really one reaction that's going to happen. You may end up with further contact. You may end up with not enough. It may look stiff. You might get a false stiff, false weak. There's all kinds of things that can happen. So by keeping that node behind the plunger when you're at draw, you can time that flex around it so that the plunger has to do very little, and you're kind of removing those inconsistencies from the equation on your release. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, please, by all means, comment, shoot me a message. I'll help clarify it as best I can. It's a very important part of aero building, and we end up talking a lot about the spines and not a lot about dynamic reactions. So this is a very important aspect of the dynamic reaction of the spine as it's coming out of your bow, and it can really help you be more consistent than you even thought possible if you're not fighting the tune of the arrow every step of the way. So I hope that helps, and we'll see you on the next one.